Hi, welcome to CMO Insights podcast series. I'm your host, Jeff Pedowitz, President and CEO of Pedowitz Group. Today, as our guest, we have Ted Rogers, who is the Chief Marketing Officer at Digital River. Ted, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Jeff. Nice to be here.
Great to have you. Before we dive in, maybe tell us a little bit about what Digital River does.
Great to be here, as I mentioned. So my name, like I said, Ted Rogers. I'm our Chief Marketing Officer. I've been here for about 6 years. Digital River really it helps brands that are seeking to grow internationally and open up new markets. And what we do is we handle all the things behind the scenes, such as international payments, tax, fraud, compliance, and even logistics to help brands be able to open up those new markets and not have to worry about some of those things that are behind the scenes that can be a real challenge for them.
E-commerce is definitely taking the world by storm. Not only, of course, it's been around for a long time with the consumer, but there's this huge push that started in the pandemic with B2B, and it's becoming more prevalent. Are you guys very active there as well?
Yeah, we cover both B2B and B2C. We actually talk about it as like the 6 dimensions of e-commerce, B2B, B2C, onshore, so local domestic sales, cross-border, and as well as digital and physical goods, or a combination of both of those. So it's really probably more than 6 dimensions if you did the math.
That's a lot of dimensions. So, unless we've been living under a rock, which I'm sure somebody has, I mean, AI has been all in the news over the last 6 months. As it relates to e-commerce, where do you see it going, and what kind of what is Digital River, I guess, doing with its platform?
AI certainly has been everywhere, especially since the rise of the fastest growing app of all time being ChatGPT, right? That was reached 100 million users in about a month. And so when I think about AI and where it's probably going to have an impact in e-commerce, I don't know how much a consumer really cares when I think about it in that regard, whether or not it's AI or that's involved in their e-commerce experience. What I really think that consumers are looking for is an experience that matches their expectations, right? And so what I mean by that, are you presenting them with the right cultural nuances? Do you have the right payment methods, currencies? But I do think AI can play a very significant role in improving those overall experiences. And what I mean by that is that enhanced personalization. Today people have recommendation engines. You get it all the time, right? People who bought this may also like, well, that was what that other person liked. That doesn't have anything to do with what I might like. So I think AI is going to play a bigger role in that kind of things, and even such. I was playing around with ChatGPT recently, and where a place that I could really see this come into play is like in travel, as an example. Consumers not know exactly what they're looking for, but they know kind of the parameters that they care about. So I actually threw in a search that said, I have a family of 4, a couple kids in the 20s. We like to golf, we like to ski, we like mountains, we like beaches. All these kind of things. And I don't want a place that's going to have wild temperature varieties that I'm likely to have colder weather than I want. And I punched all that in, and it recommended, 5 different places to go. Scottsdale, great. Been there, check. We've done that one. Yeah. San Diego, Vancouver, BC. I would have never put that one on the list. Maui and Queenstown. Those are the kind of ways that I can see this being leveraged in the e-commerce world. Understand the individual's preferences or what their desires are, and be able to return an experience or a recommendation that would meet their needs. If people can figure out how to do that the right way, I think it's going to unlock the potential to take one-time customers and make them repeat customers.
Maybe I got the prompt wrong. I did the same thing. It told me to go to my local Holiday Inn. So maybe I missed something.
Maybe that says something about your preferences. I don't know, Jeff.
That could be. Well, it's interesting that you say consumers probably won't care. I think we've proven, right, over the last 15 years, we'll trade privacy for convenience.
Yeah.
And I remember when the smartphone first came out, we were all very tentative with it. We weren't going to use it for banking. And then now, of course, even with Venmo, not only do we use it for banking, but we share what we're paying people and what they're paying us. This is like no problem. It's definitely a different time.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it does come to a comfort level. The news is doing everything they can to make it as scary as possible for people. So, people are paying attention. They're going to be nervous about it, but it all depends upon how a brand's going to use it. Brands aren't in the business to try to, I'm certainly not in the business for our brand to do something that's going to harm our reputation. You can't get that back. You have one chance to make an impression on somebody, and after that, it's really hard to recover it if you do it wrong. So I think that's where it's going to come in. Certainly, I think consumers will be skeptical on its use, just like you said, like with the smartphones in the past. I hadn't thought about the effect of banking. Right. I don't go to a bank. I do everything in that regard. I love the fact I can walk up and use my smart watch to pay for my gas. I don't even have to pull a card out anymore. All that's different. And this will just start to become mainstream. Brands are going to have to understand where and how they want to leverage it, but what I worry about is when if there are ways in which brands might, start to use it for things that might be considered more predatory in a way, right? So if you're doing product recommendations, that's benign, right? Nobody's going to look at that and say, well, how dare you look at that to provide me with a better experience? But if brands start to use it for things like, well, based upon Ted's profile that we can assess through AI, he's able to pay more. Or Bob's desperate. Bob, we should charge him more because he's desperate to get this. That's where I think brands could start to get themselves in trouble.
Hey, Bill, we have these pictures on you, and
absolute blackmail. Yeah, there's that too.
But there are, despite the worries of AI itself, like taking over the world, there are bad actors out there, right? There are known breaches that we see every day where hackers are getting into what we thought were secure systems. So as hackers and bad actors get their hands on more and more AI capable tools, should consumers be concerned though about the role that AI would play in e-commerce? Does it make it safer? Does it make it more dangerous? Is it an ongoing battle?
Well, regulation is going to come into play in some form, right? We don't know exactly what form that's going to take yet. I think, with the EU, I think it was Germany specifically was kind of leading the charge in the EU around regulation. And I think a lot of the world is sitting back to see what they're going to recommend and follow, because they tend to be very conservative on that data protection. GDPR is a perfect example, right? The data protection rights. And I think you'll see something similar in how AI takes form. But yes, fraudsters are smart. I used to run a fraud team. I haven't always been a marketing guy. I actually used to sell fraud systems and have run a fraud team. And AI and ML are already in place for, in many ways to be able to help combat those. And before AI really became a thing, it was, that we've all known about, the fraudsters have already been trying to do it. You could even look at, the synthetic identities that have been created. That's more or less a form of AI in its early stage. What I think we run the risk of now is they're going to be able to really create synthetic identities that are going to be harder to crack. But the companies that are in this space, that this is what they do to combat that, are going to are recognizing that and going after it just as hard. So we could have a period where brands and consumers are a bit skeptical, but I would expect technology for the good guys, not just the bad guys, to keep up with it as well. So,
white hat, black hat. Right?
Yeah, so exactly.
The battle.
Having been on the other side, I actually used to run a part of a company that actually got attacked by a fraud ring. And I can tell you, for anybody that's out there, if you think something's too good to be true, it probably is. And that's you still got to always put that expertise behind it. You can't just rely upon machines on either side of things. AI is going to be great, but I really think it's going to be hard to replace some of the nuances that still the human mind can use, the tools that will be created or are being created or have been created to combat these kind of actions, these kind of risks that are going to be in there, right? So I recommend to brands, just find a partner that can help you with that. We do that today for brands. That's part of the value of Digital River and helping brands go global. You go into a new market, you don't even know what to expect. It's not even necessarily what the technology is. They might have different mechanisms or different methodologies that you hadn't seen before in whatever your domestic market is. Going into a new market, find somebody that's been there, done that already, so you don't have to worry about it.
So speaking of going to new markets, I guess you can look at this through a couple lenses. One, you are a commerce platform, so you're enabling companies to do commerce in multiple regions and theaters around the world. And two, your company's rapidly expanding globally as well. Just as a CMO, share the perspectives from both sides. What are some of the things that you see trying to adapt a ubiquitous commerce model to handle all those different currencies and tax codes, et cetera? And at the same time, what's it like to be a marketing executive with a a rapidly expanding company, also going into some of those markets.
Yeah, great. So let's start with the brands first, and actually it starts with the consumer first. You talk about it being going into new markets and kind of a ubiquitous approach. It's actually, you want to platform a solution or a combination of solutions that allow it to seem that way, but yet hyper localization, being able to understand the nuances, understand how you get the transaction completed, once you drive traffic to your site. But there are a number of steps that have to happen on the brand side to be able to make that happen. This isn't Field of Dreams. It's not, if you build it, they will come. You can't just build out a shopping experience and expect new markets just to take off. There's so much more to it. And some of the things that seem real basic when we work with brands as they think about it is one, first of all, it seems really basic, is can your product actually be sold in that market? There's so many restrictions at a country level for products and the materials. What are they made out of? What are the actual components of it? You have to make sure you understand that. Another piece is, think about the compliance side. That's one piece of compliance, is can I sell my product? But how do I collect taxes? How do I pay for taxes? It's an important piece. Duties, as a product goes cross border. If you're not moving all of your inventory, we're going to handle all of that at once, but you're going to handle it at parcel level. You have to make sure you're collecting the right taxes and duties, and what's the customer experience you want for that. Do you want them to pay in a cart? Do you want to pay on delivery? And to pay on delivery, it's a really bad experience. I don't know if you've ever had that, Jeff, but where you're getting a product from another country and it comes in and somebody knocks on the door and says, you can have your product, but you owe me $20 in duties.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I didn't know I was going to do that. I mean, that doesn't happen as much in the States, but it certainly happens in other countries. So that's something that brands have to be thinking about as they're thinking about international expansion. The next one actually that next point I would raise ties both for the brands and for Digital River, is how do you drive traffic, right? Where do you already have traffic coming from, the country of interest that's coming to your domestic site? Oftentimes you can look at your company's.com and you see that you're getting traffic from, I'll pick on Germany again as an example, since we already used them. You got traffic coming from Germany. You don't have a German site, you don't have a German experience, but they're coming to your site. Well, that's a pretty good indication that there's something about your brand that's interesting to the Germans, right? And so you can build from there. And then it all comes down to not just getting the transaction done, repatriating your funds, getting them back to your own bank account, paying the taxes like I talked about, converting currencies. All these are considerations that can seem simple at a glance, but they're very challenging and be time consuming for a brand that doesn't understand it. So for brands that are thinking about that, find partners that can help you with that, make that process simple. They can shield you from some of the risks. I mean, that's what we do. We shield people from the risk of both the financial and legal obligations of making those transactions happen. But it's not just a transaction. You also got to be able to make sure you can get that product to that individual. So do you have the right logistics network, the right way to meet the time constraints of the consumer? Are you going to get the product there in a timely fashion that meets their needs? Those are important there for brands as they're thinking about opening new markets. And it's similar for Digital River. Right. So for us as a brand, it was really interesting for me. I've run marketing, obviously, in other companies, but this being much more global by nature, there was a lot to learn about the cultural nuances, both from an internal team perspective, but also our clients, right? Going around and seeing clients back pre-COVID, when we were all traveling all over the place, right? How you interact and how you work with brands trying to grow their business, whether they be in China or they're in Europe, is very, very different. You have to be able to represent your brand in the way that they want to consume it. It's putting the consumer, whoever your buyer is, at the center, is the same whether you're B2B like we're selling or you're B2C like most of our clients are selling. Putting the customer at the middle of it to understand what do they need to know, what do they want to know, and how do they want to receive that information is an ongoing daily challenge for us and for I would say probably every brand out there.
Yeah, I think for a lot of the marketers, we're seeing this big sea change in the way people are buying, and especially B2B, where people do want that direct to consumer model. I think if customers had their choice, they wouldn't talk to a salesperson at all ever.
Right.
And They can get their information online. They can watch videos. They can go to third-party review sites. They can do calculators and take demos and all that stuff. And of course, they have platforms like yours where they should just be able to check out, even if it is a seven-figure type of contract.
Yep.
So knowing that in marketing, then how do we create that direct-to-consumer model in a B2B world when you have multiple decision makers on that buying committee and the process can be complicated?
Yeah, great question about how do you convince the B2B buyer to be more e-commerce centric? I mean, the market actually is driving that. It's dictating that behavior because as you mentioned, brands are looking for efficiencies, and we've had a number of companies, number of partners that have just said, look, I am trying to make sure that we can support really kind of more of that mid-market. I think generally your enterprise it's going to be a hard time to ever get away from enterprise being, especially in the initial sale, being more of that e-commerce realm. But there are other payment methods and whatnot, like Trevi Pay we've implemented on our, as one of the payment options that allows those B2B transactions and to be, more of like a PO process. Those kind of things help. But, and one of the companies that we were working with had a mid-market SMB type of sales team. And while they're still leveraging to a certain extent, what they want to do is make that transaction process, make that back office process much more scalable and much more efficient than what it was today. No longer taking orders on a sheet of paper and submitting that by fax. Not that that's been happening a lot, but shifting that more towards that e-commerce relationship, that ongoing, being able to self-serve brands and people that are working at brands are consumers every day. So they translate those consumer expectations that they have from their day-to-day purchases into their daily work life. And to your point, right? I don't necessarily want to talk to a salesperson every time I want to add a license to something. Let me just go do it myself, right? I think you'll see more of that, and it's certainly been happening. We're seeing it. We've been signing clients that exactly in that realm.
Times are changing. That's the one constant, right?
Yeah.
So
right.
You are an experienced CMO and you've been very successful. What advice would you give to some of your fellow marketing leaders out there?
Yeah, it's funny. He's a CMO, and like I mentioned earlier, I used to run a fraud team. I've had a very different background. As somebody looked me up, and if anybody does want to talk, they can always reach out to me on LinkedIn, and we can chat either about what Digital River does, or if they want help on how they're thinking about things. I'm happy to try to help. But I'm a data-driven person, and I've done that. I used to be a programmer at one point. I used to build marketing databases, and I've run fraud, I've run collections, I've done some operations. So I'm not your pink versus blue type of CMO. I couldn't care what color something is. I use data first. What I care about is what's going to drive response, what's going to drive engagement, what's going to drive a sale. There's so many ways that data can be used in targeting and decisioning that it can become really honestly overwhelming. Here in my time at Digital River in this role, when I came in, there were a lot of ways that we were really investing in MarTech. And actually, we overinvested in a lot of the MarTech spend that we'd have, such that we were kind of peanut buttering ourselves across too many tools and too many platforms that we weren't making the best use out of any of them. So, what I recommend to people is focus on maximizing the value of the tools that you have in front of you or that you believe are going to provide the best value before you add the next one. That's certainly one thing. And we're in the process of doing that right now. And it's the same when you think about ways to elevate the brands. Focus matters. You can try to be everything to everyone, and you're not going to be anything to anyone. So, focus on the markets that you think you can have the highest right to win in. Obviously, that sounds simple, but it's not as simple as it sounds. Everybody's like, well, what about? There's always the what about. What about, Paraguay? Well, we're not ready for that yet. We're still working on Germany. We keep picking on the Germans because we have a big employee base there. But it's those kind of things. Focus on the things that work that you think are going to provide the best value first, and then expand from there. And then the third thing I would say to people, the way that I approach things is, thinking about how we make the best of our investments is I try to surround myself with a group of people that have one main characteristic. That's initiative. I don't think initiative is something you can teach. I think you either have it or you don't. I think about it a little, and I talk to my team about it like the TSA, right? If you see something, say something. Or even better is if you see something, do something. Please do something. Please. Right? So that's kind of the way I it's data driven. it's about focus, and it's about just taking action. If you can structure your team or think about every opportunity or every engagement you have with those kind of three things in mind, I think you'll find success.
Well said. Ted, thank you so much for being on the program. I really appreciate your insights.
Absolute, my pleasure. Jeff, thanks for having me.
You got it. We'll see you again soon.